God bless you this morning. How many of you are going to be traveling the next few days? God save traveling mercies upon you. All right, we are in a sermon series on the book of Psalms. And the first week we learned some of the Psalms are laments. And when our voices don't work, when we're so filled with sorrow, the Psalms can help us sort of sing the blues in life and let a lot of that stuff out. And also help eliminate the false veneers of perfection that sometimes infest our lives. We talked about B.B. King, the blues singer, and we talked about Simon Zhao, who had been in prison for his faith in Christ for 32 years. The second week, we learned about the Psalms, about how they can be testimonies to share what God has done and encourage us to give voice to our own testimonies. A lot of you sent me your testimonies by email, or you gave me hard copies, and thank you for that. We talked about Johnny Cash on that Sunday. Last week we talked about how the Psalms express wonder, and sometimes when you're standing on a mountaintop or seeing some experience like the birth of a child. Two friends of mine this week had kids, and the Facebook went nuts because they had a lot of friends. And the wonders that you see in God's creation, in God's gift, and God's grace. Even when things are not perfect in your life, you can still sing the songs of wonder, and the Psalms can give voice to that. We talked about What a Wonderful World, Louis Armstrong. This week, we're going to talk about Psalms of silence, where we can be still, even in the midst of all our busyness, and know that the Lord is God. You may want to say, hang on, Trav, this is a series about the Psalms. You said the Psalms were important. They were the hymn book of ancient Israel. Jesus looked to them and quoted from them all the time. And you said that the Psalms were for us to sing when we can't sing, and for us to speak when we can't speak. Trav, you said that the Psalms give us voice when our voice fails. It was a psalm given voice. Why are you talking about silence? How can you sing and speak silence? Let me tell you a story. It begins, of all places and all things, in a bathroom, in an apartment, a small apartment. And keep in mind, this is a small apartment, so this is a tiny, tiny, teeny-tiny bathroom. Now, this young man walks in this room, and he leaves the lights off, and he opens the water faucet, though, just a little bit, so that he can ever so slightly hear the trickle of peaceful water instead of the dull thud that he hears outside of his window, or the urban noises that's going on out there. And strangely, this young man lowers both of the lids on the toilet and sits down. So he's not using this bathroom for, how do we put it, its usual purposes. And he was going in there, rather, for other purposes. To think, to get away, to focus, and to write with a pencil and paper. So the only light that's coming in is coming in through his window. It's neon and other kinds of New York lights. And he scratches these words onto his notepad. But I'm going to let us. You don't want to try it? It'd be fun. Kurt can play. Beneath the halo of a street lamp, I turned my collar to the cold and damp when my eyes were stabbed by the flash of a neon light that split the night and touched the sounds of silence. In the naked light, I saw 10,000 people, maybe more, people talking without speaking, people hearing without listening, people writing songs that voices never share, and no one dare disturb the sound of silence. Fools, said I. You do not know that silence like a cancer grows. Hear my words that I might teach you. Take my arms that I might reach you. But my words, like silent raindrops, fell and echoed in the wells of silence. And the people bowed and prayed to the neon god that they had made. And the sign flashed out its warning in the words that it was forming. And the sign said, the words of the prophets are written on the subway walls and tenement halls and whispered in the sounds of silence. The young man who walked into that bathroom was Paul Simon. And he walked in not a few days after President Kennedy was assassinated. You don't know who Paul Simon is. He's one half of Simon and Garfunkel. Sound of Silence was their very first hit. And I have scoured for the last 6 weeks at least for every review or interpretation or article about the song that I could find. And a lot of people have a lot of things to say about this song. They say it's about social injustice and revolution and the evils of capitalism and every kind of rot you can imagine. All right? But it's always good to go back to the source. This is what Paul Simon actually said the song was about. He said this: the song is about the inability of people to communicate with each other, not particularly internationally. So this is not about politics for him, but especially emotionally. He's talking about interpersonal relationships. So what you see around you are people unable to love each other. When I was praying up the sermon before I read that review, I had this part in the sermon where there was a debate between me and Paul Simon on the value of silence. And Paul Simon had said, silence like a cancer grows. And I was going to smack that down and say something like, Paul Simon wants to destroy silence forever and all of its blessings and things like that. Then I realized that we were talking about, after I read that review, we were talking about two different kinds of silence. The dangers of silence are when there's a problem, when people need to communicate and they don't. I mean, you talked about, you know people that give each other the cold shoulder, especially in church. I mean, come on, you know? And that's when silence truly like a cancer grows. Paul is talking about the white elephants that go on in the emotions of our lives. What I'm talking about is the silence that's found in the Psalms, and the silence that the rest of the Bible encourages, begs, foists upon us. Now these are songs. There's a great guy who does a lot of good scholarship. He's gone home to be with Jesus, but his name is Dr. Bernard Anderson. And he did a lot of scholarship work on the Psalms, scholarly work on the Psalms. He also did a lot of scholarly work on the book of Leviticus, but I can't imagine a more odd way to invest your life in studying the book of Leviticus, but that's another story. He's a cool guy. But he called these Psalms the Be Still and Know Psalms. I'm calling them the Psalms of Silence. These are Psalms 27, Psalms 42, 43, 47. And you know, nearly all of these Psalms, all the Psalms that we've looked at, they were written, one reason or another, they were written for big corporate worship services, kind of like what we're having. Some of them were even written for the biggest possible celebrations the people of Israel could have outside of Jerusalem and inside the temple in Jerusalem. All right? But there are some, which are the ones we're looking at today, that were written more for use at home, more for reflection or teaching or personal meditation. And this is what I mean by the Psalms of Silence. They were for any time the singer longed for God or wanted to behold his face. Now, Psalm 43 is what I would call a psalm of silence. But if you look at the words, you're going to say, you know, Trav, you're nuts. Look at these words. We just read them. It's about fortresses and blowing things up and all these things. It says in there, you know, God Elohim is our refuge and our strength. We will not fear. The mountains could fall into the heart of the sea. And there's foam, and there's shaking, and there's earthquaking, and there's surging, and all this stuff. And that's just the first 5 verses. You got 11 in this thing. And then it talks about the raging of the nations. And we pick up the reading here. The nations uproar, the kingdoms fall, the earth melts. It's a caricature of the History Channel on a really bad day. And this stuff it's talking about, it's not silent, it's loud. Or is it? Because very quickly, the Lord turns down the volume. Yahweh is with us. the psalm says. And with his presence, he makes desolation of all the noisemakers in life and the world. He brings desolations to the world. That'll shut him up. He makes the wars cease. You see how it's about silence now? He breaks the bow. He shatters the spear. He's even breaking down the superstructure of the world to make noise and to make war. He burns the shields with fire. And all this sounds loud, but you got to remember why he's doing all that. He is bringing his peace and silence. And then he says those wonderful words that people put on Facebook memes, and they put on t-shirts, and they put everywhere, and they put on posters in children's ministry halls and all this stuff. It's be still and know that I am God. And everybody thinks that's a powerful statement of human personal devotion. The problem is the Hebrew word there it's a funny word, harpu. Can you say harpu? Harpu. It's not harpo, but it's harpu, or harpoon. It's harpoon. And, you know, people think this is about personal meditation, even sort of Chrissy, self-important kinds of personal meditation. But it's not. Be still and know that I am God. When you get that thing back to the original Hebrew, basically it means shut up and know that I am God. And, you know, I've criticized the world for being loud and warlike a little bit in this sermon. But, you know, there's times the staff and my wife can testify to this, that I need to shut up. We all do. The whole world needs it. The whole world needs to sing the song of silence. Now, I have found value, a lot of value in silence, and if you don't know this about me yet, you're going to think I'm weird, so just hang on. When I go on retreat, at least once a year, I try to sneak up there. You're only supposed to do it once a year where I do it. I try to sneak up there twice a year. And I go on retreat to a Catholic abbey called the Abbey of Our Lady of Gethsemane outside. It's about an hour south of Louisville, Kentucky, in a little town, outside a little town called Bardstown, ironically, which has some very great antique stores, by the way. That's another sermon. Okay. The monks there follow the order of St. Benedict, and they take a vow of silence. And it's not, people misinterpret the vow of silence. There are orders that take absolute vows of silence, but this is a vow that they don't give their voice to something that's unprofitable. They don't give their voice to something, they give their voice to holy things, not a bunch of crazy talk. And there, in that monastery, I found a place where you can be in silence and hear and feel the peace that the Lord is talking about bringing so loudly in this song of silence. The stuff that he is bringing into the world. And I'm leading a group there in a couple of weeks. You may be going on that trip. I hope that next October some more of you can go or choose to go. The group will be up there for a weekend. But when I go by myself, I don't say hardly anything for 4.5 days, which is kind of cool. And I don't know if you can imagine that. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine doing that? I bet you can. And I pray, and I study, and I worship with the monks, and I reflect on conversations that you and I have had, and conversations I've had with others in the community. And I pray out my sermon series for a good long time. And I found there that singing the Psalms of Silence, I can hear God's voice so much better. The prophet Elijah had this major issue. He was facing a lot of opposition. He was on the run. And he had this moment where he had to learn to sing that silence. One day, Elijah was dire straits, and he gets provided miraculously by heaven. An angel appears with some food, and this is 1 Kings 19:8. So Elijah, got up and ate and drank, and strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. And there he went into a cave and spent the night. And the word of the Lord came to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Which I think is a really odd thing for God to say. Doesn't God know? Of course he knows, but Those kind of questions from God, he wants you to think. Okay? So verse 10, Elijah replied, I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I'm the only one left. And now they're trying to kill me too. And the Lord said, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. And we all, a bunch of us, I don't know if we all know, but a bunch of us knows what happened next. And then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake came a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, pulled his cloak over his face, went out, stood at the mouth of the cave. And the word of the Lord came to him. What are you doing here, Elijah? You know, when I go to the monastery, it used to be, it would take 2 or 3 days for me to calm down and quit hearing the wind and the earthquake and the fire. Now, because it's something you have to practice, because it's not natural in some ways, it's supernatural. It takes about 6 hours for me to get rid of what was it? The wind, the earthquake, and the fire. How elemental is that? Anyway, I guess there's no flood because we've already been through the flood, but that's another sermon. Okay, but think about that. It takes a while to get used to it. It takes a while to practice it. So what are you doing here? I mean, are you just participating in the noise? Paul Simon was right, okay? There are times in real life when you have to shatter the silence because of issues of morality or justice or righteousness demand it for some reason. But Paul Simon was right in another way, and it's hidden in the first part of that song, and it's hidden in the backstory of that song. And the lines of the Bible sum it up perfectly. He had to seek out silence for focus. He had to go to the bathroom, keep the lights off, let the faucet gently trickle, and scratch on the notepad. Hello, darkness, my old friend, was the lyric to the song. It might as well have been hello, silence, my old friend, because that's my life when I walk into that monastery. Hello, silence, my old friend. And out of that silence can come lyric, it can come music, it can come power, it can come anything from that silence that honors the Lord, if the silence is rooted in the Lord. The same is true for silence that is rooted in Jesus, because the words of the Lord can come to you in power, and it must come to you through silence that is rooted in the Lord. Then you will hear the gentle whisper. And he was talking about the white elephants in the rooms of our lives, and I was talking about the Psalms and how they connect with the silence that we need in our life, away from all the noise. The noise is great out there. It is tremendous. It is a constant cacophony of God knows what, demanding your attention, trying to sell you things, and trying to convince you of things, most particularly that the Lord is not in existence anymore, that the Lord is not real, that the resurrection is a legend meant to make nice people feel nice. There's some noise that's good. For example, kid noise in church. Ain't nothing better than kid noise in church because it tells you you're alive. But much of the sound that we experience is not profitable. We need the sound of silence. And as the scripture says, the world needs to shut up. I need to shut up. Dare I say it? We need to shut up and know that he is God. Parents, I'm aware that you're teaching your children not to say that, but this is a literal translation of the Hebrew, and so I'm hiding behind the scriptures. But aren't you tired of the noise that's in your life. Aren't tired of the endless rat race and commuting and practice and recitals and the roaring that is in your ears that you hear because you have to hold up the false veneer of perfection. A shallow person would say, yes, Trav, I need a break from that. The wise person would say, yes, Trav, I need a new Christ-centered lifestyle. I need a new beginning, and I need a new day. Let the new life, let the new day, let the new experience begin today with Holy Communion. During Holy Communion, this is World Communion Sunday. Everybody says the Christians can't agree on anything. Yes, we can. We can agree on one Sunday, dadgum, where we all take communion. When you do this, come forward for the feast of the Eucharist. Keep your heart silent before the Lord. Open your heart to His Word when He speaks, when He questions. Sit there with the questions for a little bit and answer them. You have a choice to make about singing the songs of silence, to be still and know that He is God, or fall into the roar and the noise with everyone all around you. So come to this altar and leave everything behind, the roaring, the madness, the race, and yes, the false veneers, and embrace the sound of silence.